Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Jeanine and I'm here with Dave Barnett from Attract Capital. Today we're talking about acquisition financing and how this is done usually with M&A transactions. And usually through these transactions we can find that there can sometimes be challenges. However, Dave is going to talk to us about how these can also be avoidable challenges if thought thoroughly.
Very good. Thank you, Jeanine. It's great to talk about acquisition financing. We talk about it during the day for many hours. And you're right, a lot of these challenges are very avoidable if you take kind of a sensible approach to it and you take the time to think it through. And what I like to tell people is that when you're bringing in acquisition financing in an M&A transaction, it's really kind of like a triangle because you have the buyer and the seller that are connected here, and then the lender is the base of the triangle. And in order for the deal to happen, you need all three sides aligned. And a lot of times, the buyer just doesn't focus enough on some of the simple things that need to be done. So what are some of those simple things? Well, a lot of times, the buyer just they think that they can get the loan from their local bank, or they think that the person that might have provided them a small line of credit on their balance sheet is also the person that's going to give them the big check to go and buy the other company. And that's really not the case. A lot of times banks will give you small loans if you have assets in your company and they'll lend against the assets. But when it comes to buying another company, that's usually what's known as a cash flow loan. And a lot of people that we speak to, prospects on the phone all over the country and all over the world, they just don't know, they don't have deep networks of cash flow lenders. So it's as simple as they just don't know who to call. So it might sound a little odd. A lot of times they have the deal signed up, but they don't have any idea of how they're going to bring in the financing because they're a bit overconfident that their local lender, who they've always done business with, is going to give them the money, right?
So that's not the case.
And that's not the case. As much as you might think that your local banker really likes you, if you have a loan for, let's say, $1 million with them and you need another $15 million, they're probably not going to give it to you unless you have the assets.
Yeah, and that can be disappointing.
Disappointing, absolutely, Jeanine. And also like a big time waste. I mean, you could spend weeks, if not months, thinking that your existing lender will come to the table, and they really can't. So it's important to know the right people to talk to, which is a cash flow lender if you're looking for acquisition financing. And the other thing is that within the cash flow lending market, there's lots of different types of lenders. There's probably 4 different channels within the cash flow lending market. You have mezzanine lenders, and you have unitranche lenders, and you have business development corps, and you have first and second lien lenders. So there's all these different lenders out there, and you kind of have to do your homework to know, because each of these lenders have something unique about them. They're good for some things, they're not so good for other things. And so by doing your homework and really scoping out, okay, if I need 10 million, I want to get 5 million of that financing from this type of lender, and I want to get 5 million from that type of financing, or I'll get all 10 from this. So you kind of want to slice it and dice it intelligently on the front end. It's kind of like if you're going to go buy a house, you pretty much need to know that you can afford it and that you're going to get a mortgage, and you need to know what the loan options are that are available to you. It's the same thing when you're buying a company. When it comes to acquisition financing, you need to know the different options that are out there and how they'll work best in your favor.
So you have to really understand what you need for the transaction and also do your research.
Absolutely.
I would imagine you have to really understand what you're getting into and not just dive in without seeing what's in front of you.
Absolutely right, Jeanine. You have to do that. You have to know what's best for you, and you have to prioritize your tolerance for risk with your need for availability of capital. So a lot of people go with this and say, well, I'm just going to go for the cheapest loan that's available. And if you could get a bank loan, and most of the times you can't, it might be the least expensive. But the thing about a bank loan is that you have to pay it back fastest. So when you have to pay it back fastest, then that means that a lot of the money that the company that you buy is going to generate cash flow. A lot of that cash flow is going to be going out of the company to pay the bank back, which is not so good because you want to keep the cash within the company. So it's a matter of prioritizing it. We actually have a word for that. We call it capital planning.
Okay.
So it's like, you plan your day, you plan your life, you plan next steps in terms of your career, you plan where you're going to source your capital from and which form of capital is best for you.
Very nice. Okay, so sometimes the fastest route isn't always the best route in these sorts of situations.
Absolutely right. You really want to do a holistic vetting of all the options, and you want to understand it. So it really comes down to knowing what's available in the market. A lot of times also there's misunderestimation of the intensity of the process. So a lot of people that are buying companies, they think, well, the last loan we got from the bank took us 2 weeks to get. It was very easy. They were very friendly. We had a nice lunch. We signed the papers over lunch, or we signed it at the local lawyer. But when you're looking for acquisition financing, it's a whole different ball of wax. It can take, there's a process known as due diligence, and the due diligence process has a couple of sub-processes. So it takes time, and it's not easy. And you really have to have your ducks lined up in order to get through it.
So it sounds like balancing your pros and cons.
Exactly.
So going through and making sure you have what you need on both ends.
Absolutely right. You really have to balance your pros and your cons, and you have to make sure that you're prepared for this process and that your financials. Really, the most important part of this whole due diligence process is making sure that your financials are in good shape. Your financial statements, your cash flow statement, your balance sheet, and your income statement have to be accurate. They have to be available for somebody to review and to gain comfort. They look at your numbers, which is your historical financial performance. So if you have good numbers and if you have a good team that's managing this process for you, you should be able to get through it.
That makes sense. You wouldn't really want to lend money to someone without knowing exactly what you're getting into. So.
You got to know the character of the people you're dealing with, Jeanine. It's like a lot of things in life, right?
Yes.
You never know who's lurking on the internet. You never know the deep, dark background that some people have. And ultimately, lenders are very good at kind of verifying the people that they're doing business with and doing background checks. So that's another part of the due diligence
Check
process.
all the boxes.
Right, exactly. As much as people think they can do that through social media sites, you really sometimes need to pay people to do background checks.
Yeah. So I would imagine that through all this, like, people might go into it just thinking that they can just get a form, get the money, they could just kind of easily go through the process without doing all those pros and cons and going through that list that they need to make sure it's a good deal.
Absolutely right, Jeanine. I think a lot of times people think it's really simple. It's like, color by number to get a loan, and it's not. They really need to think strategically about how to present the company. So you're presenting it in the best possible light, and you also need to think carefully about the language and the words that you're using to describe the company, because some words are better to use than others, because lenders, people that you are asking money from, some words kind of trigger them and they don't like them as much, whereas other words they like them. So you kind of have to have a handle on how you're describing it so that you can make it relatable. We've had companies that were just very ordinary, mundane sounding companies, but if you're able to break it down a little bit and analyze what's really going on at that company from a functional standpoint, if you present it in sort of in a more elevated sounding way, lenders like it. And so if it sounds good, they tend to like it. And if you put it in a nice presentation, and if you really take the time to really do a nice expose of the business and the strengths of the business, lenders also like that. So I think a lot of times you really need to understand the way the lender's thinking about it once you get in this, because one of the challenges with acquisition financing is once you get in front of the lender, after you find the lenders, being understood by the lender, so they understand why it's a good company and why if they give you money, they're likely to get it back.
Got to speak the same language.
There you go. You have to speak the same language as the lenders. Exactly.
So what else can we go into that you think is unavoidable through these processes?
Well,
avoidable?
I think one thing that's avoidable is very much mapping out the time frame that is reasonable so you can set expectations with your seller. Your seller wants to close in a week, but the lender usually needs 30 to 45, sometimes 60 days to get through their entire process. So I think a lot of times what happens in these deals is that buyer and seller aren't synced up because the buyer has a lender that's going to take longer, and that leads to frustration. So you have a seller who's already got the money in his bank account or her bank account, and they're thinking about how they're going to spend the money after they sell the company. And then you have the buyer who really wants to do the deal in the worst way, but the lender has to go through all the steps in order to make sure that it's a good loan. So it causes at times there can be some emotional issues.
You're talking about this deal fatigue.
Right, deal fatigue.
Deal fatigue.
There you go. It's kind of like fatigue. It's like driving fatigue. It's like yoga fatigue. It's like relationship fatigue. It's like any kind of thing. But deal fatigue is when you're in a deal so long. It's when it takes so long that people just get a little tired of it and they get impatient. And when people get impatient and they get frustrated, there's more of a likelihood that the deal just may never close. Because there's an old saying in the deal world that time kills deals. The only free lunch when you're trying to close a deal is speed. If you can move quickly, you have a greater chance of closing the deal. If you move slowly, there's a much lower chance of closing the deal.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So I would say that you have to get to the right people. You have to plan out your process. You have to understand the language. You have to be realistic about where you are strong in your company and the areas in which you're weak, and you have to address that honestly. And I'd say the thing that we recommend most people, to most people that are going through an acquisition financing process, is they really want to bring on an outsider, somebody who's been through the acquisition financing before, so that somebody who knows the right resources for them to talk to, somebody that has an existing process, and somebody that can do a lot of the preparation to make sure that once they start on this path, that they'll be able to get through it. Because you do not want to be that person who starts a deal only for the deal to fall apart in the middle, because it just takes so much time and energy, and it just is so hard for a company that thinks that, like, if you're a company and you're going to buy another company and you're really excited about it, and you know you're going to have a bigger product line and you're going to be dominant and you're going to conquer the industry, and all of a sudden the deal falls apart, it's just such a hit to your energy. It's a waste of energy, and everybody feels dejected, and really your energy and your attitude, your organizational attitude is a key asset that you have at your company. So it really is something that you want to protect.
Yeah, and that guidance I would think would be so helpful through the entire process, to have someone working on it with you.
Well, I certainly think so. I think that when you have somebody who's been through it before, there's an ability to anticipate problems, and there's an ability to see around the corners. If you have somebody that has closed a lot of deals, who knows how lenders think, then it can really help you and coach you up to a higher level so that you have a much better chance. And really, if you can put a process in place, what you can usually do is have multiple lenders looking at the deal at the same time, which increases your probability of getting to the finish line and having a successful closing.
So it sounds like people would call you if they needed guidance with that.
I certainly think they should, Jeanine.
They should. I think you should too.
Thank you for the plug. But yeah, I think there's a lot of avoidable issues, and I think you hit on a lot of them, Jeanine. So thank you.
No problem. And so that's everything for now with financial acquisitions. And if you guys want to get in touch with Dave, because he is a good person to call on this subject, you can reach him at 631-645-1553 or dbarnett@attractcapital.com.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.